Beneath the shadow of Montana's forests, a lonely officer with a fear of dogs hears a child scream. He's still alive in there. What he finds is a battered German shepherd with secrets cut into his very skin, and a boy who refuses to abandon hope. As the town's darkest mysteries rise, three broken souls are forced together by fate, danger, and a loyalty that defies reason. But can compassion truly rewrite a life or save one on the brink? Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Autumn in Missoula began as a gentle assertion, a hush descending through the mountains, settling over the river, seeping into the marrow of the pines. Leaves along the bitterroot trickled from green to gold, drifting down in slow pirouettes to the riverbanks where the water ran glassy and cold. The nights came earlier, pulling shadows over the city's quiet grid of homes and storefronts, casting everything in the pale, unsteady light of street lamps. On the edge of town, behind a narrow drive lined with birch trees, Officer Lucas Shaw finished his shift with the quiet resignation of a man accustomed to empty hours. His patrol car rolled past faded motel signs, past windows glowing faintly behind drawn curtains, past the shuttered church with its single steeple rising like a question into the dim sky. The police radio, that companion to years of repetition, muttered only static. It was the kind of night that made memories creep through the cracks of a hardened mind. Lucas was a man of habit and boundaries, each wall of his life mortared with old caution. 49 years had pressed lines into his brow and etched calluses into his hands, but his eyes, a flat northern gray, watched the world with the wariness of someone who'd learned early not to trust what lingered in the dark. His hair, thick and gone salt and pepper, was cropped tight, and his jaw always seemed set against words he wouldn't say. He lived alone in a 2-bedroom house at the edge of South 6th Street. Inside, the furniture was practical, the walls lined with framed photos of mountain hawks and dusky herons, evidence of solitary weekends spent stalking beauty through a camera lens rather than risking it in human company. He told people he enjoyed the quiet, but most nights, the silence gnawed at him, pulling old wounds to the surface. A childhood spent with a mother who feared the world, a father gone long before he could remember his face, and above all, the memory of sharp canine teeth clamping his arm at 9 years old, pain, blood, a chaos of barking and shouting. Since then, Lucas kept dogs at a distance, both the living and the memory. Missoula was a place that welcomed solitude. The town, cradled between rivers and fir-clad ridges, lived in slow motion after sundown. Most of its inhabitants grew older together, their stories quietly folding into the dusk. Some, like Lucas, found a certain peace in the isolation. Others simply endured it, wearing their losses like invisible weights. Tonight, the sky pressed low and heavy. Wind chased brittle leaves along the gutters. The river whispered secrets only the night could hear. Lucas circled the neighborhoods, headlights skimming over porches and parked pickups, glancing off the eyes of a lone deer that ventured too close to the curb. On these rounds, he did not expect excitement. He did not expect much of anything. Somewhere across town at the old train depot, a battered German shepherd nosed through a scatter of trash behind a stack of crates. His coat, once a noble gold and black, hung dull and spiked with mud, his ribs shadowed beneath loose skin. This was Ranger, though no one called him that now. For months, he had lived by instincts honed on the mountain, scavenging, listening, staying clear of humans and their strange, unpredictable cruelty. The townspeople whispered about the stray dog in the woods, said he was feral, maybe dangerous. Some children tried to lure him with bits of bread, but Ranger never came close. To him, humans were best observed from a distance, unpredictable, unreliable, capable of kindness, but just as capable of turning cold in an instant. The old ache in his chest, the memory of warmth and belonging, had faded to a distant echo. In its place was vigilance, and a will to survive no matter how many nights passed alone. Yet something in the air tonight pulled at the edges of that animal loneliness. A scent, a shiver, the faintest sound of laughter carried from a lit window. Ranger paused, one paw lifted in the dust, ears swiveling to catch the distant whistle of a train. He stood, watching the river of headlights across the distant road, as if searching for something lost long ago. Elsewhere, in a small duplex north of downtown, 13-year-old Carter Young squinted at the homework spread across his bed, the lamplight catching in his wire-rimmed glasses. He lived with his aunt now, after everything that mattered had been torn away. His mother gone, his father vanished. His world shrunk to the hush of unfamiliar walls and the scratch of branches against the window. Carter felt invisible at school, overlooked and underestimated, but he carried a secret. He saw what others missed. The nervous dog at the edge of the park, the way the wind rattled the alley grates, the quiet sadness in people's faces. He believed, quietly, that everything deserved to be found, even if no one else was looking. And so, as autumn pressed down on Missoula, these three stories drifted through the city, an officer bound by routine and a history he would not touch, a dog surviving on the ragged edge of memory, and a boy who still hoped that being unseen was not the same as being unworthy. They were all strangers still, each holding their loneliness close, unaware of the night that would soon bind their fates together and demand that every wall, every wound, every well-defended silence be faced. In the hush before the storm, the city waited, breath held, three lives, separate and solitary, standing at the edge of change. On the last night of September, Missoula wore a restless hush. The wind had picked up, rushing through narrow side streets and tossing handfuls of leaves against rusted fences. The river, swollen from autumn rain, pushed dark and fast under the bridges. The city's pulse slowed further, every house and alley blanketed by the early hour. Lucas steered his cruiser through the outskirts, his senses tuned to the ordinary. Porch lights flickering behind drawn blinds, the far-off whine of an ambulance somewhere along Reserve Street. He pressed deeper into the forgotten grid of warehouses and vacant lots, the place where the city's memories collected dust. Tonight felt colder than most. The air threaded with a strange foreboding he couldn't name. A shape darted between the pools of shadow near the train tracks, too small to be a man, too quick to be a deer. Lucas slowed, suspicion pricking his nerves. Sometimes it was just kids sneaking around after curfew, but sometimes it was trouble. He was just about to turn back when it came. A scream, high and wild, shattering the silence. "He's still alive in there!" The voice was raw, straining, and at its edge a desperate note of fear. Then, just as quickly, a hoarse, guttural bark cut through the darkness, echoing down the alleyway. Lucas's foot found the brake. Instinct warred with memory. He didn't want to get out, didn't want to step into another unpredictable tangle with stray dogs, but his hand had already found the door handle. The radio crackled as he stepped out, baton clipped to his belt, flashlight heavy in his grip. A cold mist clung to the ground. He moved quietly, boots crunching over wet gravel, scanning the perimeter of an abandoned warehouse. There, near the back fence, a narrow shaft of yellow from a streetlight revealed a boy, skinny and small, shaking in an oversized blue sweater. His glasses slid down his nose, hair plastered to his forehead by sweat and fear. The boy's hands clutched the rim of a battered metal water tank, a padlock hanging open at his feet. Lucas approached, voice even, trying to hide his own discomfort. "You all right?" No answer. Only a wild, pleading gesture toward the tank. "Please. He's in there. He's alive. You have to help." The boy's voice trembled, not with the bravado of mischief, but with the brittle urgency of someone who'd been ignored too many times. Lucas's eyes narrowed. The tank's lid had been forced shut by a heavy cinder block. A low, desperate whine came from within. A dog's cry, rough and uneven, like gravel scraped over bone. He hesitated, pulse quickening. He could taste the metallic memory of old fear at the back of his mouth. The boy kept pleading, voice cracking. "I heard him last night too, but I couldn't get the lid open. Someone put him in there. Please, mister." Lucas knelt, hands careful, lifting the cinder block, gritting his teeth as a rusty scrape echoed in the darkness. The lid came free, swinging back with a hollow clang. For a moment, nothing. Just the dense, fetid air rising from the tank. Then, a pair of golden brown eyes flashed in the shadows, shining with fear and defiance. The dog inside, soaked, trembling, fur plastered with mud and filth, drew back, baring its teeth in a soundless snarl. Lucas felt his heart hammer, old instincts clawing for escape. But the boy, Carter, pressed in close, his small hands steady now. "It's okay. I'm here. He won't hurt you." He whispered it more to himself than to anyone else. Lucas reached in, careful and slow. The dog didn't bite, but the tension in every muscle was a wire strung tight to breaking. Together, they managed to coax the animal out. The dog collapsed on the ground, legs splayed, sides heaving, every breath a struggle. Carter knelt beside the animal, fumbling for an old towel from his backpack. He dabbed at the dog's wet fur, his own knees soaking through in the puddle, his face a mixture of relief and horror. Lucas studied them. A trembling boy, a battered dog, the echo of danger in the air. A faint movement flickered at the edge of his vision. Up the alley, past a broken dumpster, a tall figure in a dark coat slipped deeper into shadow, silent, watching. Lucas's nerves sang with warning. He swept his flashlight, but found only emptiness and the sharp scent of cigarette smoke on the wind. He had come expecting the comfort of routine, only to find himself in the first throes of chaos. A rescue, yes, but also a puzzle, a threat not yet named. The dog, though exhausted, struggled to rise. He stood unsteadily, head low, and then something in his posture shifted. The German shepherd's eyes, full of mistrust, met Lucas's. For an instant, the old fear flared, but beneath it, something else, recognition, or at least the battered memory of what it once meant to trust. Lucas's hand hovered in the space between wariness and compassion, and the boy's hopeful gaze watched every breath. The night pressed in around them, uncertain, fraught with the knowledge that this was only the beginning, and that the world, left untended, would always breed new mysteries in the dark. Behind them, the streetlight flickered and the shadows crept closer, promising more questions than answers. In the echo of a broken bark, something old and wild and longing shifted. setting all three lives onto a path from which there would be no turning back. Rain swept the streets of Missoula in fine, relentless needles, turning the world cold and indistinct. The city lights blurred, smudged against windows, trailing across puddles and slick blacktop. Lucas guided the battered German shepherd and the boy through the wet hush, every step a negotiation between memory and necessity. The cruiser's interior was cramped with exhaustion and damp, but it became a brief sanctuary against the storm outside. Carter hovered, shivering in the back seat, the towel draped over his knees and the dog curled against him, both of them silent but for the rhythm of wet fur breathing and the hiss of the heater on high. Lucas drove without speaking, fingers tight on the wheel, pulse still racing from the alley, eyes flickering to the rearview mirror, again and again, as if expecting the shadow of that watcher to emerge from the darkness behind. He tried to focus on procedure. Injured animal. Minor found after curfew. But nothing about the night fit neatly into a box. At the next stoplight, Lucas glanced over his shoulder. Carter's head was bent over the German shepherd, his hand moving in slow, awkward circles through the dirty, tangled fur. The boy's jaw worked, fighting not to cry, and in his lap the dog made no sound, but trembled with a restraint more desperate than fear. The silence thickened, full of things neither man nor boy could say. Lucas turned the heater higher and reached for the police radio, thumb hovering above the button. But in the end, he let it go. He kept driving. They arrived at the small brick building of the veterinary clinic, a modest place on the city's south side. The windows glowed warm against the night, a square of light in the rain. Lucas helped Carter and the dog from the car. His own hands shook, not from the cold, but from the weight of every old wound that dogs had ever left in him. He hesitated at the door, but Carter's look, a pleading mix of defiance and hope, gave him no room to turn away. Inside, the clinic's fluorescent lights were hard and clinical, but the waiting room held a strange comfort. The worn sofa, the faint smell of coffee and antiseptic, and on one wall, a mural of dogs and cats painted in bright, hopeful colors. Dr. Evelyn Martinez emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on a faded green towel. Her face was weathered and calm, dark hair pulled back into a loose bun streaked with silver. She assessed the scene, a soaked, trembling boy, a mud-caked German shepherd, an uneasy officer, without a flicker of surprise. "Bring him back here," she said softly, voice all gentle command. Lucas and Carter followed her into the exam room, Ranger limping between them, every step a quiet battle. Under the harsh lights, the dog seemed smaller, each rib showing stark beneath his matted coat, one ear half torn, eyes deep and unblinking. Carter never let go. His hands were raw from the rain, and when Dr. Martinez asked him to wait in the corner, he shook his head. "I won't leave him, not again." It wasn't a protest so much as a fact. Lucas watched this and felt the familiar chill of being on the outside, witness to a loyalty he could never quite claim. Dr. Martinez worked quickly but carefully, examining wounds, checking for broken bones, whispering to the dog in Spanish and English alike. She found the collar, slick with mud, a length of rope tied in a harsh knot still clinging to the metal ring. "Been out a long time," she murmured, not quite to them, and not by choice. She inspected a fresh scar beneath the fur, a burn mark near the ear, a sign of more than neglect. The dog submitted, silent, only flinching at the worst of it. When Dr. Martinez stepped away to fetch painkillers, Ranger's eyes locked with Carter's. A silent exchange, something ancient and wounded passing between them. Lucas felt the pull of that moment, the ache of what it meant. To be abandoned, to be left to fate and found only by accident or the stubbornness of a child. He wondered if this was what all his caution had been protecting him from. The mess, the pain, the unfixable weight of caring. When Dr. Martinez returned, she paused beside Lucas. "You brought him in," she said, voice low. "That matters." He shrugged. "Kid did most of it. She studied his face, saw the reluctance from the battle inside, and nodded, as if she understood every word left unsaid. Outside, the rain drummed steady and slow. Carter leaned against the metal table, watching over Ranger. The dog, battered and weary, drifted in and out of sleep, but each time Carter's hand slipped away, he stirred and pressed closer. The clinic became an island, a pocket of warmth and light holding out against the dark and the storm. In that small space, 3 souls, 1 boy, 1 dog, 1 reluctant guardian, held their places, adrift together, none quite certain if they belonged, all haunted by what it meant to be left behind. Somewhere beyond the glass, the watcher waited. The world outside was cold, and the story, whatever it truly was, had only begun to unfold. In the hush of the exam room, time stretched thin, measured only by the sound of rain against the windows and the slow, careful movements of Dr. Martinez. She moved with practiced grace, gently cleaning Ranger's wounds, her fingers steady even as she uncovered old hurts that ran deeper than skin. Carter hovered nearby, eyes raw from sleeplessness, clutching the edge of the table with white-knuckled stubbornness. Lucas stood apart, arms crossed, gaze darting between the boy and the dog. He tried to convince himself that his work was done, that he could return to his patrol car and let this become someone else's problem. But each time he glanced at Carter's hunched shoulders or heard the dog's ragged breath, something inside him twisted with a strange, persistent ache. As Dr. Martinez worked, she began to speak, not to fill the silence, but to offer a kind of anchor. "He's lucky you found him tonight. This cold could have finished him after everything else." She probed a gash along Ranger's flank, her brow tightening. "Not all of these wounds are fresh," she murmured. "Some are months old, some are newer. He's been surviving, barely." Lucas watched the dog's eyes, how they flickered open, fixed not on the pain but on Carter. There was a steadiness in that look, a refusal to yield. Lucas recognized the fight, the same tenacity he saw in himself, in the older men who'd outlasted the world's rougher edges. Then, almost by accident, Dr. Martinez brushed her hand beneath Ranger's collar and paused. "Wait," she whispered. Her gloved fingers probed the damp fur, searching. There, tangled against the leather, she found a small, crumpled shape, plastic-wrapped, dirty, and half-torn. With quiet care, she set it on the counter and peeled the layers back. Inside was a piece of a name tag, jagged where it had been cut. The surface was scratched, but under the blood and grime, Lucas could just make out faded letters. Toby Grant, and a string of numbers, their edges blurred with time. Carter leaned forward, breath caught. "That's not his name," he said, voice thin but certain. Lucas met the boy's gaze. "You know the dog?" Carter shook his head, uncertain. "No, it doesn't fit. He's too smart for that to be all there is." The moment hung, delicate as glass. Dr. Martinez jotted the tag into a small evidence bag, sealing it with the steady hands of someone who understood that every lost thing might someday matter. Suddenly, from the street outside, the howl of a fire engine split the night. Its siren wailed up the hill, echoing through the clinic's thin walls. In an instant, Ranger's body tensed, ears pricked, lips drawing back in a trembling snarl. Not from fear, but from memory. He pushed to his feet, staggering on unsteady legs, and let out a bark that filled the tiny room. Low, hoarse, unmistakable. It was not the bark of panic, but the sharp, clipped alarm of a working dog. A call trained for emergencies, a summons that belonged to another life. Carter reached for him, startled. "Hey, it's okay, boy. It's okay." Ranger's eyes found Carter's, and for a moment, the anger drained, replaced by a ghost of loyalty, something that flickered and almost vanished, but did not. Lucas watched, uneasy. He couldn't name the feeling stirring in his chest, but it ran parallel to the dog's struggle, the battle to stay upright, to stay present, even when the world threatened to drown him in old trauma. Dr. Martinez leaned in, voice gentle. "That's a rescue bark. Mountain search dogs are trained to do that. If you hear it in the wild, it means someone's hurt or lost." Lucas's gaze sharpened. The name on the tag, the scars, the reaction to sirens, it was all a patchwork of questions he couldn't ignore. As she finished her examination, Dr. Martinez found something else. A faint tattoo, barely visible under the fur, a number inked into the skin. She lifted Ranger's leg, brushing the hair aside. Her breath caught. "This isn't just a lost dog," she said, voice tight. "This is a working rescue dog. Registered. He must have been reported missing." Carter's eyes widened, hope and dread colliding. Lucas felt the edges of his routine begin to dissolve, leaving him raw and exposed to a world of messier, more human complications. He stepped into the hallway, needing air, needing space. Outside, the rain had softened, washing the world clean, but leaving everything shivering and bare. Somewhere beyond the parking lot, the watcher's silhouette appeared briefly in the glow of a street lamp, then vanished again. A warning or a promise? Lucas couldn't tell. Inside, Carter pressed close to Ranger, whispering old comforts and promises meant as much for himself as the battered animal beside him. Dr. Martinez documented every injury, every clue, piecing together a story that had not yet revealed its ending. In that fragile hour, the three of them, man, boy, Suamt's dog, stood at the threshold of something larger than themselves, a struggle only just beginning. The bonds between them, barely formed, would be tested by secrets, loss, and the stubborn hope that even those left behind could be found again. The storm outside faded into a steady drizzle, but inside the clinic, the air stayed tight with anticipation. Dr. Martinez finished her notes and placed a gentle hand on Ranger's shoulder, her brow furrowed with concern. "He'll need time and rest," she murmured. "But there's something else going on here." Lucas lingered in the hallway, thumb running over the edges of the plastic evidence bag. The tag, Toby Grant, was no answer, only another door to a hallway of questions. He stared at the numbers, puzzling over the worn digits, and felt the slow churn of dread. Something about the whole night prickled at the back of his mind, a sense of danger not yet named. He called the dispatcher to report an injured stray and a minor found after curfew, but as his words filtered over the radio, they rang false, sterile, as if he were describing someone else's life. When the operator asked if backup was needed, Lucas hesitated. "Negative," he said. "We're fine here." He didn't mention the watcher in the dark. the half-seen face at the alley's edge. Maybe he just didn't want to believe the threat was real. Carter sat cross-legged on the waiting room floor, Ranger's heavy head in his lap. The dog's breathing had steadied, but each rise and fall of his ribs seemed a fragile victory. Carter stroked the battered fur, fingers moving with careful reverence, as if the slightest mistake might cause Ranger to vanish like a ghost. The world outside pressed close, a city half asleep, its secrets slumbering under rain-soaked roofs. Carter's thoughts spun. All week he'd followed the rumors. A dog in the woods, a shadow moving behind dumpsters, strange men unloading crates by the river. He'd noticed the way the stray dogs had vanished from the park, the hush in the old neighborhoods after dark. No one had listened. Not at school, not at home. But Carter kept searching, out of stubbornness, out of hope, out of the deep, unspoken knowledge that things lost were sometimes found if you looked hard enough, long enough, with enough heart. Lucas returned, his movements clipped, and sat across from Carter, silence thick between them. He took out his notepad, flipping to the city's records of lost animals, missing, found, unidentified. "Did you see anyone near the warehouse?" he asked quietly. Carter nodded, eyes down. A man in a black coat. He had a scar on his hand. He dragged the dog out of a van. Lucas scribbled the details, jaw set. A network of names and numbers tangled in his mind. Illegal breeding, stolen working dogs, rumors of underground rings using animals for experiments or profit. He dialed animal control, but the line rang unanswered. He tried the number faded on Ranger's tag, punching in each digit with deliberate care, but only static replied. His next call was to County Search and Rescue, a brief, stilted conversation. "Yes, we did have a rescue dog, German Shepherd, lost up in Bitterroot. Name was Ranger. Handler died in a landslide. Dog never found." Lucas's hand tightened around the phone. "You're sure?" "Yeah. Even did a little news story on it. Shame, he was the best we had." He hung up, heart beating faster now, mind racing through implications. Ranger had survived, alone, abandoned, invisible, while the world wrote him off as lost. How many others, Lucas wondered, had slipped through the cracks because nobody kept looking? He scanned through the database. Other missing dogs, names that came and went. One pattern caught his eye. A string of animals, all working breeds, all vanished in the last 2 years. He thought of the watcher, the hidden van, the rough knot in Ranger's old collar, and a shiver ran down his spine. Dr. Martinez brought coffee, black and steaming in chipped mugs, and sat down beside them. "I've seen cases like this," she said. "Not often. Dogs taken for illegal training, fighting, even medical tests. Sometimes they're just sold, sometimes worse." Lucas watched Carter, the boy's face pinched with worry. "But why return him now?" Dr. Martinez shook her head. "Sometimes, when they're done with an animal, if it gets too old or sick or if someone gets nervous, they dump it. Easier than cleaning up evidence." Carter pressed his face into Ranger's fur. The ache of abandonment was more than a story in this room. It was the air they all breathed. Lucas leaned back, feeling the old anger rise. For years, he'd kept the world at arm's length, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of opening up old wounds. Now he found himself caring about this boy, this dog, this knot of mystery, despite everything he'd done to prevent it. He turned to Dr. Martinez. "What now?" She gave a tired smile. We keep him safe, and we find out who did this. As the night wore on, the rain stopped, but the darkness pressed closer. Carter dozed beside Ranger on a blanket in the exam room, while Lucas watched the empty street outside. A single car crept past, headlights off. Inside, Ranger's ear twitched, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He hadn't forgotten what hunted in the dark. And somewhere not far away, someone else watched, waiting for the moment to reclaim what they thought they owned. Dawn broke slow and gray over Missoula, drawing a pale veil across the city. Streets shimmered with leftover rain, and the mountains beyond the river vanished into the fog. At the veterinary clinic, the world seemed suspended, time measured not by clocks but by shallow breaths, soft movements, and the aching stillness after a long night. Carter woke first, curled on the old blanket, Ranger's body pressed close beside him. The German shepherd had slept fitfully, each dream a twitch of legs or a sudden whimper, as if some piece of the wild night still lingered inside him. Carter stroked his fur gently, whispering soft words only the dog could hear, promises that everything would be all right now. In the hush of early morning, it almost felt true. Lucas hadn't slept. He paced the waiting area, his eyes red and gritty, mind circling every possibility. Outside, the streets were empty, but for the occasional bus rumbling past and a crow picking at a fast food wrapper in the gutter. He watched for anything out of place, for the return of that silent watcher, but found only the cold comfort of routine. By noon, the police report was filed, the search for the dog's original owner confirmed, and the three of them, man, boy, dog, had become an unlikely team. Dr. Martinez had checked on Ranger, changed his bandages, and pronounced him stable, but warned that rest and safety were all that stood between him and another collapse. Carter was meant to return home. His aunt had called twice, voice sharp with worry, but Carter put her off, promising to come back soon. Lucas offered to drive him, but the boy wouldn't leave Ranger's side. In the end, Lucas let him stay, just for the day. There was comfort in that fragile togetherness, in the simple acts of care. Carter reading aloud from a battered mystery novel while Ranger listened with heavy-lidded eyes. Dr. Martinez humming quietly as she brewed coffee. Lucas jotting down details in his notebook, building a map of threads and questions. For the first time in a long while, the sense of being lost seemed less absolute. Then, as afternoon shadows lengthened, the spell broke. Carter went to the restroom. A quick dash down the hall. He promised he'd be right back, left his backpack beside Ranger's blanket, and vanished through the swinging door. Lucas hardly noticed. He was on the phone with Animal Control, pressing for information about recent cases of stolen pets. Dr. Martinez was in the back, sorting medicine. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When Carter didn't return, Lucas went looking for him. The restroom was empty, the small window cracked open to the autumn air. On the tile floor, a single sneaker lay discarded, as if dropped in haste. A bolt of panic ran through Lucas. He scanned the clinic, checked the parking lot. Nothing. He called Carter's name, voice echoing against the walls. Silence. Ranger, sensing the shift, staggered to his feet, nose low, ears pricked. He sniffed the air, pacing in tight, anxious circles, then barked, a sharp, desperate sound, not quite like any Lucas had heard before. A note of dread threaded through the calm. Lucas searched the alley behind the clinic, finding only the scuff of rubber where Carter's shoes had dragged, a faint smear of mud leading to the edge of a broken fence. There, tangled in the weeds, was an old dog collar, frayed, the leather split, a trace of dried blood darkening the buckle. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to a pinpoint. The memory of last night's watcher, the hidden threats lurking just beyond the glow of streetlights. Someone had come for Carter. Someone who knew the boy wouldn't leave Ranger behind. Lucas carried the collar back inside, knuckles white, anger and fear clashing in his chest. Dr. Martinez met him at the door, eyes wide with realization. "He's gone, isn't he?" Lucas nodded. "And whoever took him left a message." Ranger, wild with worry, paced to the door and back, whining. He pawed at Lucas's leg, at the backpack left on the floor, searching for a scent, anything that might lead him to Carter. For Lucas, the familiar walls of detachment cracked. The boy's absence left a hole that logic couldn't fill. For years, he'd convinced himself that distance was safety, that carelessness was an open wound. Now he felt every ache of responsibility, every inch of guilt. But fear gave way to resolve. Lucas knelt beside Ranger, his hand steady on the dog's scarred neck. "You're not going to let him down. Neither am I." The words were simple, but for Lucas, they cost everything. In that moment, the boundary between man and dog blurred, a silent pact made between survivors. They would follow the trail. They would not let Carter be another ghost in a city that forgot too many names. Outside, the fog began to lift. Lucas loaded his old service pistol, clipped his badge to his belt, and prepared for the search. Ranger, sensing the change, limped to the door and pressed his nose against the glass, tail twitching. A signal, a challenge, a promise. Somewhere out there, Carter waited. Somewhere out there, the truth lingered, darker, more dangerous, but no longer out of reach. And this time, none of them would walk alone. The last light of day faded from the sky as Lucas turned his cruiser out of the parking lot. Ranger pacing anxiously in the back seat. The dog's nose pressed hard to the window, eyes tracking every turn, every shadow that flickered across the passing streets. In the rear view, Lucas glimpsed that bent left ear, the tense set of muscle along the shepherd's spine, a body tuned to the memory of searching, of finding, of refusing to give up. The radio on the dash crackled with calls about minor thefts and traffic stops, but Lucas ignored them. This was no longer about protocol or duty. This was personal, a thread tied between himself, the boy who believed in strays, and the battered animal that had survived more than most people would ever know. The trail was faint, nearly lost in the crisscross of city smells and the aftermath of rain. But Ranger was relentless. Lucas followed as the dog led him along alleyways slick with runoff, down past shuttered stores and through a labyrinth of backyards where broken swings and rusted lawn chairs told the story of lives half-lived. As the city thinned, the houses grew farther apart, and the air took on the resinous sharpness of pine and wet soil. Lucas's headlights swept over the first lines of forest, dark, tangled, and indifferent to human worry. Ranger's hackles rose, his body quivering with anticipation. Lucas parked at the edge of a gravel turnout, heart pounding in his chest. He hesitated for a breath, the old fear rising, of losing, of failing, of what waited in the trees. But Ranger, sensing his uncertainty, looked back with an intensity that left no room for retreat. "You have to trust me," the dog's gaze seemed to say. Lucas nodded, almost in spite of himself. They moved through the trees, Lucas's flashlight beam trembling over slick roots and moss. The forest muffled every sound except the snap of twigs and the faint, insistent whine from Ranger's throat. Then, another sound, muffled but unmistakable. A child's voice broken by fear and determination. Lucas's pace quickened, the undergrowth grabbing at his boots. Ranger surged ahead, nose to the ground, weaving between trunks, darting through underbrush with renewed purpose. The terrain grew steeper, the earth soft with recent rain, but the shepherd's drive would not be denied. At last, they reached a clearing where a decrepit hunting cabin slouched beneath the weight of years. Its windows were dark, but a single lantern glowed faint through the gap of a crooked door. Lucas crouched at the tree line, heart hammering as he watched a tall man with haunted eyes and a bristle of red beard pacing inside. The man moved with a nervous energy, muttering to himself, pausing every so often to glance at a ragged photo taped to the wall. Wife and child, faces blurred by water damage. This was Dale Purcell, the ex-firefighter the city had quietly forgotten. Lucas recognized him from old reports. Once a hero, now a shadow haunted by loss and anger. His pain turned inward and outward until it distorted everything he touched. Inside, Carter sat huddled on the floor, arms wrapped tight around his knees. There was fear in his eyes, but not surrender. When he saw Ranger through the sliver of window, his face changed. Hope flickering, desperate and bright. Lucas moved to the back, careful to stay hidden, signaling Ranger to keep low. He pulled his phone, thumbs shaking, and texted Dr. Martinez their location, asking her to alert backup. No sirens, no mistakes. Dale's voice broke the silence, a ragged edge full of guilt and confusion. You shouldn't have come back," he muttered, not to Carter, but to the dog. Ranger's ears pricked, his body tense, but he did not bark. Instead, he let out a low, mournful sound, the kind used to call for help, to say, "I am here. I have found what is lost." Dale stepped toward the boy, hands trembling. "I just wanted to make it right. They said the dogs would save me, that if I could fix them, maybe God would forgive me." Carter didn't flinch, didn't beg. "You don't have to hurt anyone. Ranger just wants to go home." A silence grew, dense as fog. Lucas weighed his options. No clear shot, too much risk. But the moment of hesitation belonged to Ranger. The shepherd inched forward, eyes locked on Dale, not as a threat, but as a plea. For a heartbeat, Dale faltered. His grip loosened on Carter's shoulder. Then a branch cracked outside, shattering the spell. Dale spun, wild panic flashing in his eyes. He reached for a length of pipe resting against the wall. Lucas burst through the door, weapon drawn, voice steady, every sense electric with adrenaline. "Put it down, Dale. It's over." Dale froze. In that standoff, everything balanced on a knife's edge. The years of pain, the desperate hope, the stubborn love that remained, battered but unbroken. Ranger stepped between Lucas and Dale, his body a living shield, every instinct honed for this moment. Not to destroy, but to protect. The cabin held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The past and future colliding, a boy's faith and a dog's courage the only light in the dark. Time seemed to fracture in the claustrophobic dark of the cabin, every heartbeat stretching into its own small eternity. The lantern on the table flickered and cast wild shadows across the warped floorboards. Outside, the wind pressed against the rotten walls, rattling loose shingles, as if the forest itself braced for what was about to unfold. Lucas kept his pistol steady, arm extended, voice pitched low and calm. "Dale, you don't have to do this. Step away from the boy." His own reflection trembled in a shard of broken window. Gray hair, lined face, eyes caught between fury and fear. Dale Purcell's breathing came ragged. His hand hovered near the pipe, but his eyes darted between Carter, Ranger, and the man in the doorway. All the pain he had swallowed for years trembled just beneath his skin. A flicker of guilt, a desperate plea for absolution, warped by the weight of his losses. I tried to make it right. The world just kept burning," Dale whispered. The pipe slipped from his grasp, thudding to the floor. For a moment, it seemed as though everything might collapse under the burden of so much grief and loneliness. But then Ranger moved. With the quiet dignity of a dog who had seen too much, suffered too long, he limped forward, planting himself firmly between Dale and Carter, head high, gaze unwavering. The shepherd's body trembled with pain, but he refused to yield. Dale flinched. The dog's silent courage cut deeper than any weapon, calling to the part of him that remembered hope and loyalty. Tears tracked muddy lines down his cheeks. Lucas took the opportunity, crossing the room in 2 quick steps. He lowered his gun, voice gentle now. "Let the boy go, Dale. It's not too late. None of this will bring them back, but it doesn't have to end in darkness." Outside, a distant siren wailed, subdued, deliberate. Backup was coming, but not yet close enough to tip the balance into chaos. Dale's hand fell to his side, defeated. He let Carter go. The boy staggered back into Ranger's side, one small hand clutching the dog's collar. "You came for me," Carter breathed, voice breaking. "I knew you would." Ranger pressed against the boy, tail flicking once, a single beat of joy in the gloom. The spell broken, Dale slumped against the wall, hands shaking. "They took everything from me. I just wanted something to save." His words faded, lost in the hush that followed. Lucas stepped forward, holstering his weapon. "Dale, you need help, but this, holding them here, hurting the innocent, that's not redemption." He turned to Carter, checking for injury, then knelt beside Ranger, hand gentle on the shepherd's head. "You did good," he whispered. Ranger looked up, dark eyes shining with exhaustion and something older, an understanding that went beyond words. Then, from outside, a sound, boots on wet leaves, radios crackling, cautious voices. Police backup at last. Lucas signaled through the open door. "In here!" Officers swept in, moving fast and careful. One gently cuffed Dale, leading him away with a mix of relief and sadness. He did not fight, only looked back at Carter and Ranger with the hollow longing of someone who knows he cannot go home. As the immediate threat faded, Carter collapsed into Lucas's side, trembling. The officer put a steadying arm around the boy, pulling him close. For a moment, the three of them, man, dog, child, formed a single trembling knot in the wreckage of the cabin. Ranger sagged to the floor, finally letting himself rest. His chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Dr. Martinez's warning echoed in Lucas's mind. He needs safety. He needs family. Lucas scooped the shepherd up, cradling him in his arms as if carrying something sacred. "We're going home," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Police radios chirped in the dusk. The forest loomed full of secrets. But for the first time, Lucas didn't feel alone. Beside him, Carter held Ranger's paw and didn't let go. They stepped out into the night, Each breath a new beginning, every scar a thread binding them together, not in fear but in fragile, hard-won hope. The days that followed blurred into a gentle hush of autumn, the world gradually exhaling the tension that had gripped it so long. Missoula softened at the edges, fog curling over the river, the trees along the Bitterroot shedding their gold, old men sweeping leaves in slow, contemplative circles. The city that had once felt haunted and lonesome now held the faint glow of something mending, a fragile warmth stitched together by small, persistent kindnesses. At the veterinary clinic, sunlight streamed in through windows scrubbed clean after the storm. Dr. Martinez, sleeves rolled to her elbows, tended to Ranger with a devotion that went beyond medicine. Each day she checked the shepherd's wounds, praising his stubborn will to heal. His fur was still patchy, the scar on his ear still raw, but there was color in his eyes now, and the set of his shoulders spoke of quiet pride. Carter came every afternoon, always with a new book in his backpack or some small treasure. A smooth stone from the river, a feather, a scrap of colored thread. He read aloud beside Ranger's bed, his voice steady and brightening, as if determined to fill the spaces that trauma had left empty. Ranger listened, ears twitching at familiar words, his gaze never straying far from the boy. Lucas found himself returning as well, sometimes under the guise of official business, more often simply because he couldn't stay away. He brought groceries, helped with small repairs around the clinic, and in the quiet evenings, sat on the back steps drinking coffee with Dr. Martinez, talking about the past only when the silences felt safe enough to hold it. He watched Carter laugh, really laugh, for the first time since that terrible night. There was a lightness to the boy now, as if some invisible burden had finally lifted. For Lucas, who had lived so long in the grip of old fears and self-imposed distance, it was like watching the world come back into color after a season of gray. The city noticed, too. Word spread about what had happened. The missing dog who had been found. The boy who wouldn't give up. The officer who'd risked more than his own safety. Neighbors dropped off blankets, cans of food, and handwritten notes. A retired K-9 handler sent a harness with Ranger's name embroidered on it. At City Hall, there was talk of a ceremony, something quiet but meaningful, a way to recognize courage that too often went unseen. Carter's aunt, moved by the outpouring of support, began to volunteer at the clinic, slowly drawn into the orbit of this unlikely family. She watched her nephew with new eyes, saw the way he shone when he talked about Ranger, about the nights in the woods, about the officer who listened when no one else would. One crisp Saturday, Carter and Lucas took Ranger for his first real walk since the ordeal. The shepherd's gait was uneven, still stiff with healing, but he moved with purpose, tail wagging in short, uncertain bursts. They wandered the edge of the river, Carter skipping stones while Lucas trailed behind, hands in his pockets, his usual stoicism softened by quiet contentment. At a bend in the path, Carter paused, staring out at the water. "Do you think Ranger misses his old life?" he asked quietly. Lucas considered the question, kneeling beside the boy. He rested a hand on the shepherd's back, feeling the solid warmth beneath his palm. "Maybe," he said, after a moment, "but I think he's learning that a new life can be good too. Sometimes you find family where you least expect it." Carter nodded, his fingers brushing the fur behind Ranger's ear. The dog leaned into the touch, a soft, rumbling sigh rising from his chest. In that moment, all three understood the lesson. That healing wasn't about erasing the scars, but about learning to live, and love in spite of them. Back at the clinic, Dr. Martinez posted a notice on the community board, seeking volunteers to help with rescue animals, especially those who know what it feels like to be alone. The response was swift and overwhelming. Elderly neighbors, lonely teenagers, even a retired fireman who had lost his own dog years ago, all drawn by the quiet hope that kindness, once given, could multiply and return. One evening, as dusk settled and the clinic's windows glowed with lamplight, Carter found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a single Polaroid. Dale Purcell, handcuffed but alive, staring at the camera with a look of hollow regret, and maybe the first faint glimmer of peace. Beneath the photo, a note scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Thank you for reminding me that even the lost can be found." The boy read the message aloud, voice trembling, and Ranger thumped his tail, as if agreeing that forgiveness might be the greatest act of courage of all. In that room, with night gathering and hope quietly blooming, the future no longer felt like something to fear. It felt, for the first time in a long while, like home. Autumn's last days drifted through Missoula like a soft benediction. The city slowed, turning its face toward winter. On the porch of the veterinary clinic, a row of pumpkins glowed against the deepening dusk. Inside, light spilled across linoleum floors, casting long, gentle shadows, a mosaic of warmth in the quiet town. News of Ranger's rescue and Carter's bravery had spread farther than anyone expected. The local newspaper ran a story with a photo of the German shepherd sitting tall, his one ear still crooked, but his eyes alert and proud. Strangers dropped off cards and treats. Someone anonymously paid for the clinic's heating bill for the year. At church, prayers were said for those who kept looking after the lost. The city, long accustomed to its slow, inward rhythm, began to change in small but unmistakable ways. People who had spent years keeping their stories close now met for coffee on the clinic's back steps. Elderly neighbors brought old dogs and shy cats for Dr. Martinez to tend. Children gathered after school to walk the rescue animals or help clean kennels. Where once there had been silence and suspicion, laughter and shared burdens took root. On a Saturday morning swept clean by wind, the community gathered for a quiet ceremony in the park beside the river. Fallen leaves drifted across folding chairs. Dr. Martinez wore her best scarf, Carter a crisp new shirt and jacket. Lucas, his dress uniform, badge polished and shoes buffed for the first time in years. Ranger sat at their feet, tail curled, head held high. The mayor, a short, cheerful woman with a booming voice, spoke about hope and courage, about the importance of noticing what others overlook. A boy's stubborn faith, a dog's refusal to quit, and an officer's willingness to listen. These are the things that save us, time and again, even when we least expect it, she said. With a small flourish, she handed Carter a plaque. For faith in the unseen. Lucas accepted a commendation for his service, cheeks coloring with a humility that surprised him. Ranger received a medal, silver, engraved with his name, the bark that saved a life. The crowd clapped and cheered, and for one clear, shining moment, every scar seemed to glint like a badge of honor. After the ceremony, people lingered. Carter's aunt stood with Dr. Martinez, planning new fundraisers and adoption days. Lucas chatted with a neighbor he'd known for decades but never really met until now. Even the old fireman, who had once been lost in his own grief, stood by the fence, eyes bright as he watched the children play. That evening, as the sun set and the river ran gold, Lucas walked Ranger and Carter home through the quiet streets. The city felt changed, gentler, as if it had exhaled at last. At his house, Lucas filled 3 bowls, one for Carter, one for Ranger, and one for himself. They ate together at the kitchen table, sharing stories between bites. Later, Carter read aloud while Ranger dozed at their feet. The room warmed not just by the heater, but by the invisible cords of trust and belonging now strung between them. Dr. Martinez, closing the clinic for the night, paused at the community board to tack up a new flyer. If you need company, or have company to offer, come in. No one is too lost to be found. Mini cliffhanger and lesson. Before bed, Carter knelt beside Ranger's basket. He pressed a new hand-stitched collar into the shepherd's fur, a small tag that read, "Family Found." Lucas, watching from the doorway, felt something inside him soften and settle, a peace he had never let himself expect. He thought about all the chances he'd missed, the walls he'd built, and the way a lost dog and a lonely boy had pulled him, step by trembling step, back into the world. It was not a miracle in the grand sense, just a series of small, stubborn kindnesses, but sometimes that was enough. So life changed in Missoula. Not all at once and not for everyone, but enough. The town grew kinder, more curious, more willing to listen for the hidden stories behind closed doors. And for Lucas, Carter, Ranger, and all those who had learned to reach out, there was a new rhythm, a quiet, brave hope stitched through each day. Sometimes, all it takes is a single bark, a single act of faith, or a single hand reaching out to change a life. If you've ever witnessed a moment of rescue, a dog who saved someone, or an act of kindness that pulled you back from the edge, share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear it. If you believe in second chances and the quiet power of connection, share this story with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe so that more hearts can be touched by stories like these. May you find family wherever you are, and may every lost thing be found.